Hi, this is Chan reporting to you live at Black 9-17 San Carlos Village, Banay-Banay, Cabuyao, Laguna. And ang reporter niyo po ngayon ay nagugutom at tumatanggap ng McDo. Hi guys, kamusta kayo sa mga bahay niyo? Sana ay okay lang kayo at sana rin ay unti lang ginagawa natin. Pero syempre, parang mababa naman chance nan. At today, my group and I will be exploring and unraveling with you the topic of freedom of a human person. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we discuss the contents of the topic. What is freedom anyways? Freedom, to many people, has different kinds of meaning. And ironically, this is partially due to freedom of thought and speech. Anybody nowadays can say what they want to say or interpret things in the ways that they want to interpret that specific thing. But to generalize this broad concept, freedom defined by Oxford Languages is the power or right to act, speak, think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. Excessive freedom or excessive acts without hindrance or restraint could lead to there being no order, and things might even revert back into the ages where the law of the jungle still prevailed. That is why, to quote Albert Hubbard, responsibility is the price of freedom. This tells us three things. The first is, to keep our freedom, we must mind others' freedom as well. Second, to be responsible for our actions. And third, to follow Aristotle's golden rule or moral virtue, that is, it is important to do things in moderation. Throughout history, plenty mighty figures have fought for freedom. And to name a few, here is Abraham Lincoln, who issued the Emancipation Proclamation and freed the slaves of America. And the next one is someone who we all know from elementary, Eleanor Roosevelt. And it is because she is well known for playing a major role in the drafting and the adoption of the UDHR, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And lastly, another person that we all know, many have spread the name of this author who wrote I Have a Dream. He is Mr. Martin Luther King Jr., who also fought for the freedom, or more specifically, the equal rights of Black Americans. Here is a quote by Mr. Martin. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. We Filipinos have experienced this firsthand. The Spanish has colonialized us for hundreds of years. And eventually, we decided enough is enough, and that we desire freedom to act and to speak and to have a nation of our own. On another note, what better way to present freedom than through music, which allows songwriters, singers, and even us listeners to express the emotions, the feelings, traumas, and experiences inside of us. Examples of this that have the titles with freedom in their names directly include Freedom by Pharrell Williams, which subscribes to the idea of freedom fighting against slavery. In that YouTube video, there are many forms of slavery shown. These include overworked and underpaid miners, sweatshops, child laborers, etc. And through that video, Pharrell was trying to advocate freedom by spreading awareness. He must have felt deeply frustrated at the sight of slavery and its multitude of forms, which eventually drove him to write a song in the hopes of putting an end to those kinds of things. Another example is a song from the movie Pitch Perfect 3, which is titled Freedom 90 on YouTube. I selected a few words from the lyrics. These include freedom, I won't let you down. Freedom, I will not give you up. And freedom, you gotta have some faith. We must also keep these things in mind because the first line is trying to express to not let freedom down. You must never let anyone say or take away the freedom you rightly possess since birth. The second line, freedom will not give you up, is more direct. It expresses that we must never exchange or give up freedom for anything. And finally, the last line is conveying that faith is an important part of freedom. Moving on, considering Article 14 of the UDHR, which deals with the right to free speech, freedom to me is when you choose what to do because you have the will to, not because it makes sense or because other people have told you to do so. In history or even in historical/fictional K-dramas, we've all seen that despite the social pressure, people or the characters tend to deviate from what is expected of them by society. And it is a great example of being free. I for one believe that, like dignity, freedom is inherent in us all. There may be rules that we have to follow. There may be traditions or even people pushing us to do the so-called right thing. But inevitably, we get to choose to follow that rule. We are the ones who make the traditions and adhere to them. And we even embrace the things that are being pushed to us unknowingly. I know there's pressure, but honestly, frick that. We get to choose whether we go with these precepts or just choose letter E instead of A, B, C, or D. Because we are our own masters. These pressures may be coercion or being forced to do those things, but from my perspective as of now, although idealistic, we are the ones who still get to choose whether we let them coerce us or stand up and fight back. Even without options, there's still an option. Restricted, there is freedom. Adhering to a style limits the people, but it is within that we are able to make creative and ingenious choices that could even result in a revolution. We are free, but it is important to keep in mind that our freedom comes with the cost of responsibility. Each of us has our freedom, and it is important to mind others' freedom as well. We discussed freedom's definition using a dictionary, a quote, history, a symbol or form of it, music, and my own interpretation. Before we discuss what the philosophers thought of freedom, let's let you, the audience, define freedom. Moving on to how philosophers viewed freedom, we'll start off with a very renowned one. From the ancient Greece, Plato, student of Socrates, originally named Aristocles, and has a nickname which roughly translates to the broad. His view about the meaning of freedom is related to the good. The module here is a bit confusing, and I have already tracked the original source as well as made further research, so I have made the decision to remove the confusing parts and simply explain to you the crucial ones. Plato starts with the assertion that every human being has a specified talent and should therefore be assigned with a specific job. This logically leads him to the conclusion that there can be only certain people that are capable of ruling. According to Plato's statement, not every citizen, but precisely only those who are fit to ruling are capable of leading a society. And of course, every individual towards the good. Okay, let's stop for there. Let's stop right there. Let's not discuss the good for now. Let's address the confusion that everybody watching must feel after hearing about freedom and Plato stating that there are only unique or qualified people to lead, implying that he thinks that everyone has a predestined role, which is the opposite of freedom, right? Well, the title of his POV for freedom starts with the word political, which clearly involves politics. Now, in his time or during the ancient Greece, democracy was already prevalent, indicating that democracy has a long history. Due to his prior experience, Plato does not consider this democracy as the best form of government. In The Republic, a book he wrote long ago, he criticizes the direct and unchecked democracy of his time, precisely because of its leading features. First off, despite Plato's belief that freedom is a fundamental value, democracy entails the risk of having too much freedom and doing anything one wants, which might result in anarchy. Second, equality, which is associated with the idea that everyone has the right and equal aptitude to lead. This will attract a variety of power seekers who are more interested in their own interests than the good of the society. So, thus, democracy is very corruptible. Since democracy is very corruptible, it can result in tyranny because it opens the door to the demagogues, politicians or leaders that use or appeal to the desires and prejudice of the people instead of rational decisions, and future authoritarian leaders, which is a very fancy term for rulers who rule with an iron fist. Such, Plato's fundamental criticism of the democracy he knows from ancient Greek political experience is that it is unstable, ranging from anarchy to tyranny, and that it needs leaders with appropriate talent and morals, even though it may not be applicable to modern liberal democracies. Now we get why Plato initially stated that people who are unique and there are certain qualifications that must be met in order for a person to lead a society, and it is not saying that people must have that people are limited to their roles given to them by life. They can strive to be a good leader or to have the qualities of a good leader, and maybe they would have a chance to lead our society. Anyways, let's now discuss the good that is referred to in his POV about freedom. Plato argues that the cosmos is guided by an essentially good principle that makes sense and provides order to life. He likens it to how the sun illuminates everything in the world, allowing us to see all that is significant. This means that just like how the sun emits sunlight and warms up the world, humans are inherently good. Plato once stated that humans are social animals that are incapable of living alone. They form communities or societies, and in order for a person to fit in or live in that community, one must have the capacity for rationality and goodness. Another short excerpt from Plato is knowing everything that is good is knowing the good itself, and vice versa. Meaning, knowing the good itself is equivalent to knowing everything that is good. Everyone is theoretically free to select a profession, cast a ballot for one party or another, engage in certain activities, etc. And in this case, knowing something good is equivalent to knowing everything else, everything that is related to good. For example, you are just a kid and you are learning how to help your mother do your housework or chores. You are maybe cleaning or helping her in cooking and other activities in the house. Here in this scenario, you're essentially learning how to help others as well. It can be, for example, helping an elderly cross the road, It could also be helping someone who is struggling, either financially or you see someone carrying heavy objects. That is what is meant in my opinion. That is what is meant by knowing everything that is good is knowing the good itself. How about you guys? What do you think of this quote? Comment down below, and the first five who answers gets a point in the recitation. Okay, moving on. Plato asserts that all of these free choices are driven by the desire for the good. So, to summarize Plato's POV about freedom, a society relies on philosophers to lead it towards the good, or to make good decisions for it. The philosopher's job is to determine what is good for everybody. Only when true philosophers, or those who understand what is good, dominate a society and keep everyone else from making poor decisions and enslaving themselves to what they mistakenly think is good, but is actually just their atavistic impulses, can philosophical freedom exist? So, kung medyo confusing, yung philosophical freedom lang daw na ini-state ni Plato sa kanyang theory ay ma-achieve kung ang mga philosophers, yung mga philosophers na alam talaga kung ano yung mabuti, ay yung nag-lead sa society para i-lead sila towards freedom. Just like yung kanina na a unique or a person with qualities of a good leader can lead the society towards the good, right? That is all for Plato's side. Fun fact, eleutheromania is apparently a word. I haven't actually heard of it. I'm Hannah Costales, a member of mine, just recently mentioned this to us. It refers to an intense desire or obsession for freedom. Have you ever experienced eleutheromania? Do not quote me on how I pronounce that specific word. It's just a guess. Okay, that is all for me. Later, you will see me once again for the summary of our lesson. Next is Miss Arian Brillantes, and also the editor for this video.
Next we have in here is Rene Descartes. Well, actually, in his theory, it's like we will tackle about the truth and the good. And as you can see in our screen, Rene Descartes does not see freedom as the achievement of the philosophers. Kasi Plato ay naniniwala na we are only exercising freedom by consciously choosing what's the best for us, or like consciously choosing to be good for ourselves. However, to Rene Descartes, he sees freedom as the necessary prerequisite to doing philosophy in the first place. And ano nga ba ibig sabihin nun? Well, to Descartes, in order for us to do philosophical thinking, we need to have our own freedom. It does really make sense actually, kasi nga, we cannot do philosophy thinking or like we can deep thinking if we doesn't have any freedom, right? But that is not in the case in here. We will have a look on the exact comparison in the second part of the paper. For Descartes, the real question is not what is the good, but rather whether we can possibly ever find out about it. And in order to find out, Descartes starts by clearing himself had any idea that could be possibly false. He looks for a foundation to build his philosophy on by doubting every idea that is not entirely self-evident. Consequently, he claims that in order to experience the highest level of freedom, we must be able to perceive the truth and goodness clearly and distinctly. We should search for something muna, like we have to know the truth first, and then maybe you could apply the goodness, which is yun nga yung paniniwalaan ni Descartes na maging precondition ng mind natin bago magsagawa ng isang bagay. In other words, the more we lean toward the combination of the truth and the goodness, the more freedom we have in making decisions. For Albert Camus, a man, just like Plato, there are also two different ways of interpreting human freedom. There is a freedom that everybody has to choose options, just like to do, think, to refuse, or etc. Like for example, eating a fries and dip it on an ice cream, or dip it on a ketchup. It just depends on us people. And another one na pininiwalaan niya is that observed freedom. For him, observed freedom is like, yun yung totoong freedom. Bakit? Kasi the meaning of observe is the ability to live a life without meaning. To him, or according to him, sa mundong walang meaning, people can learn that they are free to do whatever they want, including making their own decisions and accepting responsibility for their actions without being subjected to legitimate social or other pressures from our society. And moreover, it let us learn to only act in accordance with our own intentions and personal values. And that's what it means to live observably. That's why Albert Camus believed that observed freedom is a true freedom. And according to him again, it is the revolt that gives life its worth. Because the purpose of life is to live freely while understanding the absurdity.
Hello everyone, I'm Pia Mae Boco and I will discuss to you the freedom by the philosophers John Locke and Jean-Jacques Rousseau and the determinism undermining free choices. John Locke, the nature of freedom of action and freedom of will. Locke argues that free will and willing are both appropriate and should be judged by their own actions, not by necessity. He offers accounts of action and forbearance as well as voluntary and involuntary actions and forbearances. He also questions such as whether we are free in respect of willing and whether we can be free to will what we will, which he gives divergent answers. Some commentators think that Locke freedom, or as Locke also calls it liberty, is a single power, the power to do what one wills. However, as Locke describes it, freedom is a two-way power, really a combination of two conditional powers belonging to an agent, that is to someone, endowed with a will. So here, he argues na ang freedom of will is the capability to do as one's desires or intentions, pero hindi ito nagpapalaya sa atin. While ang freedom of action is another necessary condition for freedom. So for example, a person locked in a jail cell has the potential to will anything, yet the person is constrained in acting on his or her desire. However, Locke argues freedom that consists in a right to act in accordance with one's own will, as long as one's actions are just and does not infringe on another's right. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, The Social Contract Theory. His early work argued that the development of civilization had actually led to a decrease in happiness, and that humans should live instead in a state that was as close to nature as possible. The Social Contract, with its famous opening sentence, "Man is born free, and he is everywhere in chains," stated instead that people could only experience true freedom if they lived in a civil society that ensured the rights and well-being of its citizens. The social contract is one of the defining texts of modern political philosophy, advocating for individuals to be involved in civil society for their liberty. So he argues that entrance into the civil state results in the transformation of the human being from a stupid, limited animal into an intelligent being and a man. Furthermore, philosophical theory that political legitimacy of the state is founded by the individuals participating in the social contract. This contract is hypothetical and is created by people so that they are no longer in a state of nature. Since man is free and independent by his very nature, he can be in a state of freedom. The only way he can lose his state of freedom is by creating a social contract. Man must give up his state of freedom and become a part of the society and the state. There are 5 types of determinism according to Philosophy Terms 2016, and that are causal determinism, predeterminism, fatalism, theological determinism, and advocate determinism. So, causal determinism, often known as physical determinism, is one of the oldest and most fundamental types of determinism. It is strongly related to the ideas found in causality philosophy. This branch of philosophy states that every event is caused by prior events and conditions and the laws of nature. Meaning, ang mga event o mga kaganapan na nangyayari sa atin o sa paligid natin ay di lang siya basta-basta nangyayari by any random chances dahil lahat ay may cause or pinagalingan ng isang bagay kaya nangyari ito. Parang cause and effect lang. Pero ito ay maaaring connected din sa universe. Meaning, nangyayari na lang ang isang bagay dahil ganun talaga kung paano mag-work o ganun na talaga ang universe. Kumbaga, it is what it is. Halimbawa, meron akong babasagin o glass na baso. Hinulog ko ito. Ano nangyari? Siyempre, nabasag. Isa yon sa halimbawa ng law of nature. Kasi, imposible na kapag nahulog iyon o tumama sa sahig, hindi siya mababasag. Imposible yon. Kasi, that's how universe works. However, there are two positions associated with causal determinism, and that is nomological determinism and necessitarianism. Ibig sabihin, bawat kaganapan ay kailangan mangyari. Parang strict version ng causal determinism o mas mahigpit na niya ng determinismo at sinasabi na ang bawat kaganapan ay tinutukoy ng law of natures. Hindi ito magiging isang kaganapan kung walang paraan na di ito maaaring mangyari. Halimbawa ay ang ulan. Ang ulan ay minsan lamang maganap. Nakabatay din to sa law of nature, water cycle, barometric pressure, at temperature at iba pa. Kumbaga, lahat ay nakabatay lamang sa law of nature ng universe. Kaya kahit na ang isang bagay na tulad ng panahon ay tinutukoy din ng law na iyon. Next is necessitarianism. There are no prospects for other outcomes as if the world can only be as it is. Everything we do is always going to happen, and it will be impossible to do otherwise. There is no free will. Everything was always going to happen. Meaning, lahat ng ginagawa natin ay palagi mangyayari at imposibleng gawin kung hindi man. Walang free will, lahat ay palagi mangyayari.
Predeterminism is the idea that all events are predetermined not merely by their immediate causes but since the beginning of time. It is the belief that all events, including human actions, are established or decided in advance. So, parang itong predeterminism is implied by causal determinism, since whatever happened at the beginning of time would determine the chain of cause and effect after. Sa case ng predeterminism, this chain of events has been pre-established and human actions cannot interfere with the outcomes of this pre-established chain. So, predeterminism simply implies that if world's events are predetermined, this means na wala ng free will, walang miracle, and walang chance events. Fatalism is the attitude of mind which accepts whatever happens as having been bound or decreed to happen. Ito yung paniniwala na lahat ng pangyayari or events are determined by fate. Fatalism is a belief that we have to accept the outcome of events and that we cannot do anything that will change the outcome because events are determined by something which we have no control. It is said that fatalism is loosely synonymous to determinism, but of course, may distinction pa din silang dalawa. They both mean that how our life ends up is decided by forces other than ourselves, but the difference between the two is in how the direction of our lives is decided. Sa fatalism, meron tayong one true fate and we will end up there no matter what. Our life may take whatever journey it wants, pero hindi natin maiiwasan or we cannot escape our eventual fate. On the other hand, determinism means not only that we have one predecided fate that we will end up with, but also that every event in our life is decided by earlier events and actions. In short, fatalism is a theory that there is some destiny that we cannot avoid, although we are able to take different paths up to this destiny. Determinism, however, is a theory that the entire path of our life is decided by earlier events and actions. Fatalism does not presuppose causality, but it is compatible with choice with respect to some events and is compatible with the existence of miracles. Yung mabibigay kong example for fatalism is, let's say na may lugar or may particular place na natamaan ng sakuna, and this event would be seen as an act of God na hindi natin kayang i-prevent. Also, fatalism has been used as a political philosophy, with some leaders using it to justify their actions. For example, is that Napoleon Bonaparte believed that he was destined to rule the world. To simply put, the idea is that the major events such as birth, death, major discovery, and so forth will happen regardless of causes or chance. Quote and unquote, what will be, and there is nothing we can do about it. Theological determinism is the view that God determines every event that occurs in the history of the world. Loosely, we can think of this as the view that God has decreed the world to be exactly as it is, or that God controls every aspect of creation. It is the idea that God has determined our fates, or that God knows what they are, which would also imply that they cannot be changed. According to Nikolai Baxter, theological determinism offers various sets of propositions evolving around the scope of God's sovereignty, control, and foreknowledge as a supreme being. Adequate determinism is the determination. It is the will in free will. Adequate determinism is the idea that although quantum reality is partly non-deterministic, it is deterministic enough for all practical purposes, because the unpredictability averages out at the human scale. Adequate determinism means that randomness in our thoughts about alternative possibilities does not directly cause our actions.
The act of making a choice. So, Robert Nozick, in his Philosophical Explanation 1981, sketched a view of how free will is possible, and how without casual determination of action of person could have acted differently, yet nevertheless does not act random or arbitrarily. So, ito yung free will natin, is yung kakayahan natin sa sarili natin na gawin or mag-decide na kung ano yung gusto natin. Ito yung you decide whatever you want to do, or you want whatever you want. Yung mga choices na yan, yung free will natin. Example natin dito is bilang ikaw, may kakayahan ka sa sarili mo na mag-decide kung ano yung mga bagay na gusto mo, ganun. Ibig sabihin, kunwari, ikaw nga bilang ikaw na, kunwari bukas, kung ano yung mga gusto mong mangyari sa'yo, ganun. Kung ano yung mga gusto mong mangyari sa future mo, ito yung mga free will natin, yung mga, hindi siya naka-base sa prior events, yung mga nangyari sa past mo, or kahit anong event na nagpa-trigger sa'yo para gawin yung choice na to, hindi siya nagbe-base sa ganun. Ibig sabihin, free will mo lang kung ano yung mga gusto mo lang, ganito, ganyan. So, ang casual determination naman natin is nagbe-base siya dun sa mga prior events na mga nangyari sa'yo, or yung mga events na, nagbigay sa'yo ng dahilan para i-make mo or gawin itong choice na to. So, ibig sabihin, yung casual determination is nagbe-base siya sa mga past events mo na nangyari sa'yo. Ito yung kaya natin ginawa itong isang bagay na to is dahil siya sa mga events na mga nangyari sa'yo. So, ang example natin dito is yung man, or ito yung husband niya, is minimurder niya yung wife niya. Ang sabi dito is, kaya niya minimurder yung asawa niya, yung asawa nitong husband na to, is because nga yung mga prior events niya or yung mga nangyari sa kanya sa past niya ay nagpa-trigger sa kanya para i-murder yung asawa niya. Pero naman sinasabi ni Robert Nozick, kaya hindi lang naman nagbe-base siya sa mga ganun na casual events nga niya, kasi nga ito yung free will natin na bilang isang tao. So, ang casual determination nga natin is ito yung ginawa natin tong isang choice na to dahil nga dito sa mga nangyari sa atin sa past events natin. So, ayun nga. Pero, meron nga tayo sa sarili natin, yung side natin na, meron naman tayo na, na meron tayong sa sarili natin na kung gusto natin gawin yan, merong choice pa din naman natin yan eh. Choice pa din naman natin yun. Pero, dapat, hindi rin naman sinasabi ko na dapat yung sarili natin yung sisihin natin dahil sa mga nagagawa natin, sa mga actions natin. Kasi nga, tayo responsible sa actions natin. Pero, eto nga yun na meron tayong sa side natin na kaya natin pinili yung choice na to is because ito yung may mas matimbang sa atin kung bakit natin pinili ng choice na to. So, eto nga to. Si Robert Nozick nga, in-explain niya dito sa kanyang sa The Act of Making a Choice nga ito nga yung si Robert Nozick nga is sinabi niya itong free will, ay yung choice natin, pumipili tayo or gumagawa tayo ng choice natin base sa free will natin na walang casual determination. Ibig sabihin nito is pumipili lang tayo, ganun. Wala siya kasing, hindi natin kasali yung mga past events natin, ganun. Ito yung, ibig sabihin yung free will lang, wala siyang casual determination. And, ayun nga, itong free will na to, is, ito yung ginagamit natin. Ito wala nga siyang casual determination. So, ibig sabihin, hindi rin siya random. Hindi random din yung natin, yung pagpili natin. Kasi nga, pag pumipili tayo ng choice, kahit dalawa yan, kahit tatlo, meron pa rin sa atin na sa tatlo na to, mas may matimbang sa atin. Kunwari, meron kang dalawang pagpipilian, cellphone or laptop. So, sa case mo ngayon, sinabi mo na laptop, pero kasi may cellphone ka naman, pero hindi lang dahil ganon. Kasi nga, yung laptop is paggagamit mo siya sa mga academics mo, sa schools mo, ganon, and marami kang pwedeng gawin sa laptop. So, ibig sabihin, hindi lang random yung pagpili mo sa isang bagay, dahil nga, may kinukonsider ka pa din na i-prioritize mo tong ganitong bagay, ganito, ganyan. Yan yung sinasabi ni Robert Nozick nga, na gumagawa tayo ng choice natin, hindi lang siya random. Wala nga siyang casual determination. Pero, hindi rin siya random na pagpili natin sa mga choices natin na kaya natin pinili itong isang bagay na to is random lang na pindot-pindot lang, ganun ba? Kunwari sa exam. Tapos, yung meron siyang choices na A, B, C, D. Tapos, kunwari, binasa mo yung tanong and you pick random, like letter C. Kasi, the power of C, ganon. Pero, hindi siya ganon. Like, nagko-consider pa din tayo, nag-i-eliminate pa rin tayo dun sa mga question. Like, kapag hindi natin alam yung sagot sa answers, ganun, nag-i-eliminate tayo, ganun, di ba? Like, kaya nga, pinipili natin isang bagay, hindi lang siya random, kasi nga, may kino-consider pa din tayo is, kumbaga, sa atin, pumipili tayo sa choices na yun dahil ito yung mas pabor sa atin, mas nagbe-benefit tayo. Yun yung sinasabi dito ni Robert Nozick na hindi lang tayo gumagawa ng choice dahil ito yung random lang, gusto lang natin. Dahil nga ang sabi nga ni Robert Nozick is yung paggagawa natin or yung paggagawa natin ng choices is wala siyang casual determination kasi free will lang natin siya. Pero yung free will na yon hindi siya random lang na ginawa mo, ganon. Kasi yung free will na yon is meron pa rin reason behind that. And lagi natin tatandaan na lahat ng choices na pinipili natin, base nga dito sa The Act of Making a Choice na ito, ay lahat ng bagay na pinipili natin ay may dahilan o may mas matimbang para sa atin. Kaya nga lahat ng pagpipili natin ng choice, hindi lang siya random. Tandaan natin na hindi lang siya random. Dahil nga, ang pagpili natin sa choices na ito is meron pa rin pinipili natin yung mas matimbang para sa atin. Kung ano yung mas nagbe-benefit sa atin. Sabihin na natin na mas nagbe-benefit. Pero, yun nga, yung sinasabi ko is kaya tayo pumipili tayo sa dalawang choices or sa kahit anong choices na yun kasi ang pinipili natin yung natin, yung pinaka-pabor sa atin, yung pinaka-gusto natin. Yun yung sinasabi ni Robert Nozick. So, meron tayong types of values. The first one is the intrinsic values. So, ibig sabihin nito refers to the built-in value of the thing itself. So, ibig sabihin nito, wala tayong consideration, wala nating, the value itself. So, ibig sabihin, yung value na to, wala siyang reasons kung bakit natin binavalue tong isang bagay na to. Ang example natin dito is, studying is good act in itself. Ibig sabihin nito, studying is good, period.
ibig sabihin, wala siyang reasons, wala siyang broad explanations kung bakit yung studying ay good sa atin. So, yun lang yung idea ng intrinsic value. Wag na natin paguluhin yung sarili natin. Binavalue natin ang isang bagay dahil lang sa kung ano, yung ano siya, ganito, ganyan. Yun yung intrinsic value na sinasabi natin. Yung wala siyang explanations kung bakit natin binavalue yung isang bagay. Yun yung intrinsic value. For our second value is the instrumental value. So, object's value or something value means to an end. Ibig sabihin nito, meron na tayong reasons kung bakit natin binavalue itong isang bagay. So, example na natin. Ituloy natin yung example kanina. So, kanina yung example natin, studying is a good act studying is good act in itself. Ibig sabihin, yun na yun, studying na yun. Pero dito pumapasok natin, studying will help you to learn your lessons well and to understand your lesson well. And, studying will help you to earn a high grades. So, ibig sabihin natin dito, hindi na lang siya binavalue mo yung isang bagay dahil ito na yung isang bagay. Meron kang reasons kung bakit mo binavalue yung isang bagay. Ibig sabihin nito, instrumental values na siya kapag meron siyang reason na 1 or 2 reasons na nagsusupport sa ating value na to, yung reason natin, yung good studying, di ba yung studying, bakit maganda yung good studying? Dahil nga, nakakatulong siya sa'yo sa pag-aaral mo ng mabuti, di ba? Pwede rin siya na earn ka ng high grades dahil dito sa pag-aaral mo na to. So, ito yung idea ng instrumental value. Dito mo na siya binibigyan ng meaning kung ano yung binavalue mo, kung bakit mo siya binavalue. Meron ka ng meaning or meron ka ng reasons. Ito na yung reasons natin. Pumapasok na yung reasons natin dito sa instrumental value natin. Na yung instrumental value, hindi lang siya dahil binavalue mo yung isang bagay na to. Meron siyang reasons behind that. And ito na yung instrumental value natin, okay? So, ayun. Nagigets nyo ba yung pinopoint ko? So, yung instrumental value, meron na siyang explanations kung bakit mo binavalue yung isang bagay. Or bakit mo binavalue tong studying na to, bakit siya importante sa'yo, diba? Doon na siya pumapasok, yung sa instrumental value. So, another example natin sa instrumental value is ang money. Money. Ang money ba is, gusto ba natin ng money dahil gusto lang natin ng pera? Di ba hindi naman? Kasi, gusto natin ng pera dahil may mga gusto tayong bilhin. Gusto ko ng pera kasi gusto kong gumala. Gusto ko ng pera kasi nga gusto ko ng bagong cellphone. Gusto ko ng pera para mabili yung mga gusto ko. Kasi ganun nga tayo, di ba? So, ibig sabihin, dito sa instrumental value, gusto mo yung isang bagay na yun dahil may reason ka. Meron kang dahilan kung bakit. Meron kang purpose. So, ibig sabihin, dito sa instrumental value is, meron siyang purpose nga na nagdi-decide sa atin kung bakit gusto natin tong isang bagay na to, katulad nga nitong pera na to. Tapos, ito naman, good. Meron siyang good for its own sake. So, ibig sabihin, ito ay intrinsic value. Good for its purpose. Ibig sabihin, ito ay instrumental value. So, dito natin makikita natin, mapagko-compare natin yung dalawa, yung intrinsic value at yung instrumental value. Which is, kung saan, itong intrinsic value na to is, ito lang siya. Good for its own sake. So, ibig sabihin, good lang siya, ganun, kasi maganda siya, ganito, ganyan. Pero dito naman sa instrumental value, meron na siyang reason. Ito yung good for its purpose. Ibig sabihin, meron siyang purpose. Good siya sa purpose na to. Ito lang instrumental value. Yun yung idea ng dalawa na yun. Nagigas niyo po ba yung tinutukoy ko? Ayun po. Yung intrinsic is, siya lang yun. For its own sake, ito na siya, valuable siya dahil ito siya. Pero, ang instrumental value, meron siyang reason or meron siyang purpose. So, the last one is the originative value. Through this value, you can all have the 3 values. His or her actions can make a great change or different valuable consequences. Ibig sabihin, kapag ginawa mo isang bagay na to, marami siyang consequences na pwedeng mangyari, and meron naman din siyang, kapag ginawa mo isang bagay na to, may mga possible na hindi lang naman ito yung consequences nito. Katulad naman ng ginawa ng founder ng Apple, na tumigil siya sa pag-aaral niya sa college or nag-college dropout siya para nga magkapag-discover ng mga computers, which is nag-lead na pagkakaroon ng Mac computers and iPhones and iPads na mga usong-uso naman sa panahon ngayon. Dahil nga sa pagtigil niya sa college at pag-discover ng mga computers, yumaman siya. Nagkaroon ng sikat na Apple sa lahat at sa buong mundo. So, ibig sabihin, lahat ng ginagawa nating actions, meron siyang iba't ibang consequences depende sa tao. Dito sa originative value, pinapakita dito na hindi lang isa, dalawa yung consequences na pwedeng mangyari sa action natin. Dito sa originative value, ito na yung pinakang malawak. Like, lahat ng mga possible outcomes nandito pumapasok sa originative value. Hindi lang siya dahil na ganito na meron siyang reason na ito lang, ganito, ganyan. Pero, dito sa originative value na to, dito na lahat ng mga possible outcomes na pwedeng mangyari is madidiscuss na siya. Dito sa originative value yun pumapasok na lahat ng pwedeng mangyari is masasabi, madidiscuss. Ganon. Dito sa originative value natin yun, makikita or mababasa natin dito. To conclude that G values, mas papalawakin pa natin or mas papaintindi natin sa inyo. So, ang intrinsic value, wala siyang ethical consideration, wala siyang reason, and wala siyang supporting detail. Ibig sabihin, ito lang siya, yun na nga yun, ito na. Wala na siyang mga reasons kung bakit mo pinili yun or gawin. So, dito ko mapapatanong na, paano mo nasabi? So, ibig sabihin, papasok na siya sa instrumental value. Dito ka na magdi-discuss. Dito mo na magkakaroon siya ng discussion kung bakit dito. Dito ka na may reasons. Ito na yung magiging narrow na yung value ng isang bagay. So, pagka ganon, sa instrumental value na siya kapag may mga reasons na siya, ganito. Tapos, in the end, mapapatanong ka na naman na, paano ka nakakasigurado? Ganito, ganyan. O, diba? Paano ka nakakasigurado na ito nga, value na to is may patutunguhan ba siya? Ganito, ganyan. So, dito na papasok yung originative value. Sa originative value, ito na yung lahat ng mga possible outcomes na kalatag. Ayan. Lahat ng mga pwedeng mangyari sa'yo, ganito. Lahat ng mga pwedeng mangyari sa mga decisions mo, sa mga choices mo, ayan, nakalagay na dito. So, ibig sabihin, ang intrinsic value, wala siyang ethical consideration, wala siyang reason, or wala siyang supporting detail nga. Tapos, pagdating naman ng instrumental, dito na papasok yung reason ng reason mo. Ito na yung reason. Dito na papasok yung reason. Pero pagdating naman sa originative value, nandito na lahat ng reasons mo para mapapayag mo or ma-convince mo sila. Like na, katulad nga ng, dito nga sa example nga kanina na yung founder ng Apple nga ay hindi nakapag-aral ng college pero tingnan mo ngayon, sobrang successful na niya. Ibig sabihin, maraming mga possible outcomes yung mga gagawin natin bilang isang tao. Ganito. Yan. Yun naman yung mga palatandaan na yan. Paano mo nasabi? Paano ka nakasigurado? Tapos, ano yung mga possible outcomes na? Yun na yung tatlo na value na tinutukoy dito sa the act of making a choice. Ayun lang. Broad reason, narrow reason, and yung lahat ng possible outcome. So, ibig sabihin, ang intrinsic, broad reason. Tapos, ang instrumental, narrow reason. And, dito naman sa third, which is the originative value, is, ito na yung originative value, ito na lahat yung mga possible outcomes natin.
According to Oscar Arias, the more freedom we enjoy, the more responsibility we bear toward others as well as ourselves. Hi, my name is Ryza de Chavez and I am here today to discuss to you what is freedom and responsibility. So I know lahat naman tayo is familiar na sa word na to, freedom. Freedom is ability to decide and create something for ourselves. Ito yung mga bagay na walang pumipigil sa atin, free tayong gawin, o walang umuutos sa atin. And another meaning nito is choosing between alternative choices. Kunwari, kung papapiliin tayo between adobo and sinigang, and then pinili natin yung sinigang. So, i-disregard din natin yung adobo since hindi naman yung pinili natin. So, it shows or it illustrates that we can choose whatever we want na walang pumipigil sa atin na parang ayun yung gusto nating gawin or ayun yung talagang gusto nating piliin. So, there are two elements of freedom. There are voluntariness and responsibility. Voluntariness, it's derived from its word voluntary. Ayun yung mga bagay na voluntary tayong ginagawa yun na parang kahit hindi naman natin responsibilidad na gawin yun, is ginagawa natin. And ang example na nga nito is yung mga tita na nagbibigay ng baon or nag-aalaga sa mga pamangkin nila. Na parang hindi naman talaga nila responsibilidad na gawin yun kasi hindi naman sila yung magulang ng bata. But ginagawa nila yun kasi voluntary nilang ginagawa yun. And then responsibility. Responsibility is refers to a person being held accountable of his or her actions and consequences. Ang example na nga lang nito is yung having a child na parang having a child or pagkakaroon ng anak is malaking responsibilidad yun na parang kailangan mo siyang pag-aralin, kailangan mo siya laging bigyan ng baon, kailangan mo siyang alagaan na parang kasi alam ko marami sa atin na parang sinusumbat sa atin ng parents natin na parang pinalaki kita tapos parang parang utang na loob pa natin sa kanila kasi but in the first place is hindi naman nating choice na mabuhay, 'di ba? Na parang ginawa nila tayo na parang hindi natin responsibilidad na pag-aralin natin yung sarili natin kasi parang wala naman tayong choice, diba? Kasi parang, ayun, nabuo na lang tayo bigla na parang responsibilidad ng magulang na pag-aralin tayo, na parang bigyan tayo araw-araw ng baon, na parang ayusan tayo, bigyan tayo ng kung ano-ano na mas makakabuti sa atin. So, ayun yung example ng responsibility. So, because of voluntariness and responsibility, we can now reflect on our actions to better understand them and guide us for making a best possible decisions. And we must always remember that if gagawa tayo ng mga choices, kailangan natin silang pag-isipan ng mabuti kasi meron itong consequences na kapalit na parang hindi natin kayang bumalik sa nakaraan para baguhin yan, na parang real life is not like a movie na parang pwede mong i-stop or pwede mong i-rewind or ulitin yung nagawa mong desisyon. Parang hindi ganun yung real life na parang kailangan natin maging wise sa decisions natin. So we have a freedom and responsibility of property. So property rights are key to freedom and responsibility. Example of this is services, labor, money, and land. And ang mabibigay ko na example dito is allowance. So we have a freedom na gastusin yon, bilhin yung mga gusto natin, yung pagkain, damit, kahit ano pa. And however, responsibilidad din natin kung paano natin pagkakasahin yun or paano natin iipunin yun. Since allowance nga sa show, kailangan natin siya pagkasahin sa 1 linggo, 2 linggo, or 1 buwan. So we have a non-use property. Non-use property may serve a valuable function to the individual and society as its use. Ang halimbawa na lang natin dito is pagbaba ng isang produkto or pagbaba ng presyo ng isang produkto for a certain good na parang yung owners is willing siyang i-exchange yun. But after that is wag mag-expect yung owner ng subsidiary for keeping their property out of the market and they should expect to be penalized. Second, we have a voluntary exchange. Voluntary exchange is a transaction where two people trade goods or services freely and dalawa silang magbe-benefit doon. Example na lang is yung owner na nagtitinda ng strawberry. And then, yung owner is voluntary exchange his or her money and then her agriculture expertise. And then yung customer naman is voluntary exchange her money to buy that strawberry. And then if yung customer is may nakitang defect dun sa strawberry, meron siyang freedom na sa iba na lang bumili. So, they have both desirable outcomes. So, it's called voluntary exchange. And then third, we have a involuntary exchange. Involuntary exchange is just opposite of voluntary exchange. Ayun yung sapilitan or parang ayun yung hindi voluntaryong ginagawa na kailangan talagang pilitin. And then yung example naman nito is corruption, fraud, and military offensive. Ayun yung, and nag-o-occur siya when your property is destroyed or stolen. So fourth, we have a protection of property rights, the first duty of state. So we all know naman na parang meron talagang lakas or parang may kapangyarihan talaga ang isang state or nation na and responsibility naman talaga nila protektahan yung tao, not only yung tao, pati yung property ng mga tao. So last is taxation is appropriation of property. So, hindi naman siguro magandang pakinggan or magandang malaman na yung property mo nga is punong-puno ng security, na hindi talaga mananakawan. But sa taas naman ng tax, is wala kang choice kundi i-dispose yung property na yun para mabayaran yung tax. So that's why tax should be minimized or parang kailangan talaga kahit papano is hindi ganun kataas yung tax kasi masakit siya sa bulsa. And then, kahit ganun pa ka-good yung security, kung mataas naman yung tax, is wala ding saysay or parang wala ka ding choice kundi i-dispose yung property na yun. So for the activity, explain how does responsibility affect your freedom? And what is an example of freedom and responsibility?
Nations are the divisions of human populations into groupings with a properly shared cultural, historical, constitutional, and linguistic background. So basically, if we connect these two into freedom, there's no nations if we don't have freedom, right? One thing that we have in here is democratic units. They provide a vital function in maximizing the chance the democratically elected government will implement policies that will have the broad support of the populations. Meaning, people have like a chance to elect government freely. They have like the chance to vote good government in order to support the people's nations. However, it is a mistake to try to subsume nations within supranational organizations. It means that mali ang i-handle ang mga tao within supranational organizations. Bakit? Kasi ang organizations na to ay pagkakaibang namumuno kada organisasyon sa mga kanilang lugar. And by this, the commonality between the peoples represented is diminished. Yung like pag-share natin ng our thoughts, ideas, or let's say our freedom is mawawala. Kasi nga, the government or like different government have different policies kada organisasyon. And any interventions by these organizations must therefore represent an unsatisfactory compromise between the various cultures. In other words, if ever magkaroon ng interference of one state in the affairs of another, and instead of having a positive outcomes, mas lalo magkakagulo kasi nga, we have a difference of beliefs or paniniwala. These differentiations of homogenizations. Nations can learn most effectively from each other by pursuing the policies that reflect the preference of the majority of their populace, and comparing the outcomes with the different policies and preferences of other nations. Well, actually, homogenizations is like culture ng atin. Culture ng ibang tao. Kung saan dito we compare and contrast different cultures, nations, or each other. And if we move, or if they move towards a common view to this process of experimentation and education, then they may gradually cooperate more closely on a voluntary basis, perhaps eventually to the extent of uniting under one government. Meaning, if they move to the more process, then there's a possibility na mag-unite ang isang nation and also the government. By this, they may have their own freedom to talk with their culture, experience towards each other, or like for their thoughts. However, this process must be voluntary and progressive, because it might be dangerous if it's forced.
Freedom and responsibility in terms of wealth. It is the accumulated property. Individual net wealth is the property that an individual owns minus any debts that they owe. National wealth is the sum of the net wealth of all citizens and organizations. First is that money is supply and wealth money is not wealth. Money is a medium of exchange and the yardstick for valuation. This means that monetary expansion or inflation does not increase wealth. In the short term, it transfers wealth from most people and organizations to the beneficiaries of monetary expansion like government, big corporations, and their clients. In the long term, it destroys wealth through its inhibition and distortion of the market. The second one is mercantilism and protectionism. Mercantilism and protectionism means that we all benefit from each country's comparative advantages through trade. We must buy other countries' products in order for them to have the money to buy our products, and vice versa. Mercantilist policies focuses on the accumulation of wealth and resources while maintaining a positive trade balance with other countries. By maximizing exports and minimizing imports, mercantilism is also viewed as a form of economic protectionism. Second to the last is human wealth. There are many things in human experience that contribute to the quality of our existence, beyond those things that can be bought and sold. Like all experiences and human valuation, they are psychological, subjective, and mutable. The last one, or our fourth one, is the natural wealth. Natural wealth refers to all materials or substances occurring in nature such as soil, subsoil, plant, fossil, water resources, and so on. There is a difference between a natural resource in the ground and a natural resource within someone's property, for which there is a demand that can be met economically. Only the latter can be considered as a part of our wealth, and only where intervention is required to ensure that the extraction of this resource respects our property rights is this a matter for policy. This subset of natural wealth is also a subset of property and needs no separate consideration from the broader consideration of property rights.
So we have a freedom and responsibility when it comes to capital. So what is capital? Capital is anything that increases your ability to generate values. For example of this is bank accounts, company cars, stocks, and bonds. The role of capital in the calculation of economic progress. So in economics, capital is assets just like physical tools and equipments that allows increased work productivity. So by increasing work productivity through improved capital equipment, it can be produced more goods and standard living can rise. Capital must have a monetary value. So, if walang specific or halaga yung isang capital, it will be just meaningless. Kasi nga, ang point talaga ng capital is to assist a economic calculation. Capital requires property rights. So, one of the purpose of capital is used in production goods. So, yung person na naka-employ dun sa capital na yon is kailangan meron siyang rights or meron siyang karapatan para gamitin yun or meron siyang property rights para gamitin yung bagay na yun.
So, to summarize, freedom has many different meanings, and just as everyone in today's world has more or less their own interpretations, the philosophers of the past also had theirs. First off, there is Plato and how he views freedom needing a leader or philosopher that knows the good and can guide the masses to the good. And there is Rene Descartes and his views that freedom has a prerequisite, or freedom is a prerequisite to doing philosophy, meaning that when we are free and nothing is holding back our mind, then we can do philosophy. Albert Camus, on the other hand, additionally thinks that philosophy is can be interpreted in two different ways. One is that everybody has to choose an option, or in a set of options, and the other is absurd freedom, where he thinks which he thinks is true freedom, where man is free to do whatever he wants outside of the given choices. And the last two, which are John Locke and Jean Jacques, John discussed. And the last two, which are John Locke and Jean Jacques, John discussed free will and freedom of action as being a two-way power, someone and will. So someone who is endowed with a will. And Jean stated in his social contract theory that man is born free and he is everywhere in chains, meaning people could only experience true freedom if they lived in a civil society that ensured the rights and well-being of its citizens. After the philosophers, we tackle determinism and its types. Determinism is opposed to freedom because it is a theory that says everything is determined by previously existing causes. If everything was determined, what would be the use of fighting against fate and changing your future for the better? There are five types of determinism. One is causal determinism or physical determinism. It is the oldest and easiest to understand because its meaning is already in the name. Cause, right? Things are determined by a cause, and this has a two subsets, which are nomological determinism and necessitarianism, I think. Moving on to predeterminism, which is the second one, it is basically saying that everything has been predetermined to happen since the beginning of time, and that there are no possible changes in the outcome. The third type is fatalism. This is basically the fantasy version of the second one, which involves fate and destiny. The third is, I mean, the fourth, the fourth, or the theological determinism says that God has already determined our fate and that cannot be changed. While the last one, or the fifth, is the adequate determinism, which deals with the science and the idea that although quantum reality is partly non deterministic, it is deterministic enough. Moving on to the act of making a free choice, I will not go into deep. I will not go deep into this because I have a question regarding it, and Miss Klouie has already adequately explained the topic. So next is the theory of values. When making a choice, we naturally determine the value of each decision or the factors that can change the decision. That is where the three value theory comes in. The first is intrinsic value, which is valued because it is what it is, like there is no other explanation other than it is good for its own sake. While the second, which is instrumental value, is valued because there are reasons behind it, or it is good for its purpose. And the last, which is the originative value, is that everything has its causes and outcomes. So basically, it is a very broad value. Okay, the last topic that the reporters discussed was freedom and responsibility. To have freedom, one must act responsibility and in accordance with that freedom. Meaning that although we are free to do what we want and choose, we must still consider the outcomes and of that decision or action born out of freedom. There are two elements that define freedom, which are voluntariness and responsibility, which helps us reflect on our actions to better understand them and let them be a guide. We have freedom and responsibility in terms of property, nation, wealth, and capital. And it is important to consider these and their subcategories, which was discussed earlier and can be found in the module, to make sure that our freedom is not being violated and that we are not encroaching on the freedom of others as well. So, to end this video, I will again quote Albert Hubbard: "Responsibility is the price of freedom. To keep our freedom, we must mind others' freedom as well, be responsible to our actions, and follow Aristotle's golden rule or moral virtue, that is, it is important to do things in moderation." That's all for our report. This is our group signing off. Bye-bye. Okay, hi. For our first question, what is freedom for you? Explain your answer and note that plagiarism is not acceptable. And as Sir has mentioned before, only the first 10 commenters will be considered, and also those that do plagiarize their answers will be eliminated from the 10 and will be replaced by the next one. Good luck to you all. After hearing about it from Miss Klouie, can you restate what she said about making a choice in your own words and share at least one experience in making them? Haha, I'm back again. Do you agree with the theory of determinism? Why or why not? Share at least one example. Here is another question for you guys to answer. Freedom without mutual responsibility is the law of the jungle. What can you gather from this, and why is it irrelevant? And why is it relevant, I mean? Ikaw tatanungin, would you rather be free or be ruled with an iron fist? Why? For you, what should be the goal of public governance and financial management should be? Answer in your own words with reference to the module. Again, plagiarism is not acceptable. Ito, medyo mahaba-habang tanong, kaya be prepared. In a nation with democracy, it is believed that the people have freedom to choose who is tasked with governing the populace. However, does that include the minority or those opposed to the popular candidate? If so, why? And if not, propose an answer that may or may not solve this dilemma. Okay, last question. According to UDHR's Article 14, share an opinion on which this matters the most and how it is relevant to you as a senior high school student. That's all.